The fluorescent lights above the congressional mediation room buzzed softly. The only sound in a space so quiet it felt like time had paused. The polished mahogany table in the center gleamed under the sterile white glow, but there was nothing sterile about the tension in the air. It was thick, heavy, the kind that presses on your chest like a weight you can't shake. Caroline Leavitt stood at one end of the table, a figure of conflicted composure in a cream blazer that now felt too bright, too bold for the room she was in. Her fingers clutched a folder of notes, but her mind was racing, faster than any press conference, faster than any campaign debate she had ever faced. Opposite her sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, stoic, unreadable, calm like the eye of a hurricane. At 43, she carried herself with the weight of experience and the silence of someone who had seen people try to tear her down before. Only this time, the attack had come from someone much younger, much bolder, and completely wrong. Just 3 weeks earlier, Leavitt had delivered what was supposed to be a hard-hitting segment on national television. With unwavering confidence, she claimed that Crockett had once been investigated for domestic violence and academic misconduct during law school. There was no hedging, no qualifiers. She said it plainly, like it was public record. But it wasn't. And what followed was chaos. Social media platforms caught fire. The segment was clipped, memed, and broadcast across echo chambers. Hashtags trended. People took sides, some gleefully weaponizing the allegation, others outraged by the perceived smear. But while the internet argued, Jasmine Crockett's life began to unravel. Her office was flooded with hate mail. Her teenage son received anonymous threats. Funders pulled out of local projects she had championed for years. And worst of all, her integrity, the very foundation of her career, was under siege. She didn't respond with a tweet or a press release. She responded with a lawsuit. $40 million. Not just for defamation, but for emotional trauma, for public endangerment, and for the price her family had paid for a lie. I earned everything I have, she told reporters outside the courthouse. I will not let it be undone by a careless accusation dressed as commentary. The story exploded. It wasn't just political anymore. It was personal, human, messy, raw. Leavitt, for her part, was blindsided. Her ratings had spiked, but so had the scrutiny. She insisted she'd relied on briefings, that the information had come from her team. But public opinion doesn't wait for facts. Sponsors dropped her. Interviews were canceled. Legal experts debated her liability on national panels. And behind the scenes, her legal team scrambled. Now, in this quiet room, away from the microphones and pundits, she had one last chance to stop this from becoming the court case that could end her career. I asked for this meeting because I wanted to speak without scripts, Leavitt said, her voice steadier than her hands. Directly. Honestly. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. What happened next would surprise everyone in that room, and later the nation. This wasn't a political clash. This was a reckoning. A warning shot in an age where misinformation moves faster than truth, and where a single sentence can set fire to a life. But beneath the fury, the shame, and the silence, something unexpected was about to rise. Before we take you into this story of defamation, redemption, and an unprecedented alliance between two women who should have remained enemies, hit that subscribe button. Because the end of this story isn't what anyone expected. This is the story of a lie that sparked a lawsuit, and a confrontation that may change the rules of public discourse forever. Before they became adversaries in one of the most closely watched legal battles of the decade, Caroline Leavitt and Jasmine Crockett walked vastly different paths. Paths that, until one fateful moment, had no reason to ever cross. Caroline Leavitt had always moved fast. A communications prodigy from New Hampshire, she skyrocketed into national attention as one of the youngest members of a presidential press team. Articulate, bold, and unafraid of controversy, she quickly became a fixture on conservative television. By 28, she was hosting her own primetime segment, known for its snappy takedowns, combative interviews, and no-holds-barred style. Her audience adored her. Her critics feared her. And behind the camera, she was being groomed for more, potentially even a political run of her own. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, had built her career on something very different: quiet resilience. A former civil rights attorney from Texas, she'd earned her reputation by taking on difficult cases no one else would touch: wrongful convictions, housing discrimination, police misconduct. When she transitioned into politics, her campaign wasn't flashy. It was community-based, rooted in trust and transparency. And that's how she legislated. One bill, one speech, one voter at a time. She wasn't viral. She was respected. Their worlds collided in the worst possible way. The lead up to the scandal began innocently enough. Caroline's team had been preparing a segment on transparency in public office. The idea was to scrutinize the personal histories of several lawmakers. Opposition research flowed in, some credible, some not. One unvetted document landed on her desk 2 days before airtime. It claimed that Jasmine Crockett had once been investigated during law school for both domestic violence and academic misconduct. The source? A fringe blog with no real credentials, citing unnamed campus insiders. A junior researcher flagged the story. No corroboration, she wrote in a Slack message to the producer. Highly speculative. The producer replied, "We'll soften the language. Just say records show past investigations." That's not technically false. But what aired that night was anything but soft. "There are serious questions about Congresswoman Crockett's past," Caroline declared, looking straight into the camera. "Sources indicate she was once the subject of multiple investigations, including one for domestic violence and another for academic dishonesty. We'll let you decide what that says about her character." The segment lasted less than 2 minutes. The damage lasted far longer. Crockett found out from her son, 15 years old, who'd been shown the clip at school. By the time she saw the broadcast herself, the story had already gone viral. Hashtags like "Where's Crockett Cover-Up" and "Where's Jasmine Lies" were trending. The blog that started it all was getting hundreds of thousands of hits. Local radio stations picked it up. Online influencers pushed the clip. And suddenly, a completely unfounded claim was being treated as political gospel. Crockett's office issued a statement immediately. "These allegations are 100% false," it read. "There is no record, past or present, of any such investigations." But the internet didn't care. She was called a fraud, a liar, a disgrace. People posted doctored photos of her with black eyes, insinuating domestic abuse. Anonymous threats filled her inbox. Her staff had to increase security at her public events. One event in Dallas was canceled due to bomb threats. And perhaps worst of all, a group of major donors withdrew funding from a neighborhood development project she'd spent years assembling. Behind the scenes, Crockett was shaken, but furious. She reviewed the broadcast, then the blog, then the internal communications from her law school. There had never been any investigations. The accusations were fiction, fabrications circulated as political ammunition, and Caroline Leavitt had delivered them to millions without even blinking. For a week, she stayed silent publicly, but inside her legal team worked nonstop. She wasn't going to issue another statement. She was going to court. The lawsuit, filed in federal court, was aggressive and direct. "This is not a case of journalistic error," it read. "This is a case of personal defamation delivered with calculated disregard for truth." It sought $40 million in damages, financial losses, reputational harm, and emotional trauma. The document included screenshots of online abuse, messages sent to her son, fundraising records that flatlined, a timeline of events showing exactly how the lie had metastasized into full-blown reputational destruction. The media lit up. Some called it brave, others called it censorship, but no one could ignore it. And Caroline? She was stunned. "I didn't make anything up," she told her legal team. "This came from my producers. I trusted my briefings." Her team scrambled to reconstruct the paper trail. They found discrepancies, early versions of her briefing that included warnings, Slack messages cautioning against airing the claim, a pre-recording edit where qualifiers had been stripped out for clarity. Most damning evidence that her staff had altered the language without informing her. But under the law, intent doesn't always matter. She said it publicly, emphatically, and now she was being held accountable for it. With the trial looming, public pressure mounting, and sponsors pulling out by the hour, Leavitt made a decision that shocked even her own lawyers. She requested a private mediation with Jasmine Crockett. "I want to explain myself," she said, "not as a defendant, as a human being." And so, the stage was set, not just for legal confrontation, but for something much bigger. A reckoning between truth and narrative, between damage and redemption. The days following the segment's broadcast marked the beginning of a wildfire. Within hours, the clip of Caroline Leavitt's damning allegations against Jasmine Crockett had made its way across every major social media platform. It was shared by influencers, dissected by political commentators, and replayed on podcasts from both sides of the aisle. But what fueled the blaze wasn't just the accusation, it was the speed with which it spread and the absence of any fact-checking from the broader media ecosystem. Even mainstream outlets, desperate to not miss out on the story, aired segments discussing rumors surrounding Crockett's past. Chirons blared, "Crockett under scrutiny." Editorials speculated on whether her silence was an admission. Opinion hosts posed leading questions like, why hasn't she denied it on camera? Crockett was shell-shocked. Her office received over 3,000 calls in 48 hours, many of them threatening. Reporters camped outside her home. Her son had to be pulled out of school. Her chief of staff begged her to hold a press conference, but Crockett refused. Not out of fear, but principle. "If I respond, I legitimize the lie," she said. "We're not playing by those rules." But while she stayed silent publicly, she moved aggressively behind the scenes. Crockett's legal team began assembling a case unlike anything media lawyers had seen in years. The lawsuit was filed 5 days after the segment aired, speedy by legal standards, surgical in its precision. The complaint named Caroline Leavitt personally, as well as her network, the show's producers, and 2 PAC-backed media advisors who had allegedly pushed the story forward. The filing included detailed exhibits, text messages, emails, Slack logs from her campaign team. It also contained a damning affidavit from a former intern who claimed the team had deliberately removed language that would have cast doubt on the accusation. The heart of the case was clear. Leavitt had either knowingly spread a false story or at best recklessly failed to verify it. Either way, the law, particularly defamation law, had something to say about that. Her legal team responded with the expected defense. She relied on information provided to her. She had no reason to doubt its accuracy. This is a political figure. The threshold for defamation is higher. But the public didn't buy it. Crockett truth trended nationwide. Activists staged demonstrations outside Leavitt's network headquarters, holding signs that read, "Lies have limits, and journalism is not a weapon." Prominent journalists, including those critical of Crockett's politics, defended her integrity. Some outlets ran full-on fact-checking investigations, proving conclusively that no such investigations into Crockett's past had ever existed. Law school officials released a public statement disavowing the claim, and then came the fallout. Several corporate sponsors suspended their advertising on Leavitt's show. A major publishing deal she'd been negotiating quietly was terminated. Speaking engagements were canceled. Her co-host declined to appear on air with her. The network, under increasing pressure, pulled the original episode from its archives, an unusual move that was interpreted as a silent admission of wrongdoing. Behind closed doors, Leavitt was imploding. Her team held emergency strategy meetings. Some wanted to settle, others argued they could fight it and win. Her lawyer, Richard H., warned her, "You are the face of this whether you meant to be or not. The plaintiff has proof that the story was doubted internally. If we go to trial, discovery could be brutal." But for Leavitt, it wasn't just about the lawsuit anymore. She felt betrayed. Her staff had made editorial decisions without her consent. They'd removed the very warnings she would have heeded, and now she was the one paying the price. The weight of it all crashed down during a sleepless night when she opened her phone to yet another death threat. Only this time, it wasn't sent to her. It was sent to her younger sister. That was the turning point. The next morning, Leavitt walked into her lawyer's office and said, "I want to speak to Jasmine, directly." "What do you mean?" Richard asked. "I mean, I want to talk to her. No cameras, no media, just us." "Caroline, this isn't a misunderstanding you clear up over coffee. This is a $40 million lawsuit." "I know, that's exactly why I need to try." After several tense negotiations, Crockett agreed on one condition. It would be a formal mediation with legal teams present, but no press. The setup was arranged. The congressional mediation room was cleared, guarded, and sealed. And the 2 women, whose lives had been irrevocably altered by a 2-minute broadcast, met for the first time not in a debate studio or courtroom, but across a polished oak table. What happened in that room would not be revealed for days. But the moment they entered, everyone knew this wasn't just about settlement money or public apologies. This was something else. A battle over the soul of public discourse. A confrontation between accountability and denial, integrity and spectacle, truth and convenience. Outside, the world waited, and the storm was only getting started. What Caroline Leavitt didn't know what would haunt her long after the lawsuit was filed was that the real battle wasn't only in court. It was within her own walls. After the initial shock of being named in the $40 million lawsuit, her legal team launched a rapid internal review. The goal was clear: establish intent. If they could prove Caroline hadn't knowingly spread false information, their legal footing would improve. But what they found only made things worse. The review began with a deep dive into internal communications. Emails, text messages, Slack threads, thousands of documents poured in. At first it was noise: editorial notes, show rundowns, calendar reminders. But then, buried in a Slack conversation from 2 days before the broadcast, her lawyer Richard H. found something chilling. Producer: do we have solid confirmation on the Crockett segment? Researcher: not really. The source is that old campus blog. I found nothing else to back it up. Producer: she's already prepped. Just make sure the copy says sources indicate and cut the qualifiers. Researcher: that's misleading. Producer: we're not publishing an expose, it's opinion TV. Legal will back us. The researcher never responded. Richard called Caroline into his office the next morning. His expression was unreadable. We found something, he said, sliding the printouts across the table. This is from your team. Internal Slack time-stamped the day before taping. Caroline scanned the conversation. As her eyes reached the bottom of the page, her heart dropped. I never saw this, she whispered. I believe you, Richard said, but legally that may not matter. She turned pale. My final script didn't have any of the disclaimers, it just said what it said. We know. We also found 3 versions of your segment briefing. The first 2 flagged the Crockett story as unverified. The third, the one you received, didn't. Someone altered it. Your media director, he's no longer cooperating. The implication hit like a punch. Caroline hadn't just been sloppy, she'd been manipulated. Set up in some ways by her own people who prioritized shock value over truth. But even if that was true, she had delivered the words. On camera, without question. In court, they'll argue that you were reckless at best, Richard said. At worst, they'll say you were complicit. The next 72 hours were brutal. The legal team huddled in emergency meetings trying to decide how to handle the discovery. They considered using it to argue for a reduced settlement. They debated turning over all internal files immediately in a show of good faith. They even briefly considered blaming the staff publicly, an option Caroline refused flat out. I said it. I'll own it, she told them. But I need to fix this somehow, not just the lawsuit, the lie. That same night, she stayed up late rewatching the segment. She watched her face on screen, calm, authoritative, certain. She hated that version of herself. Not because she was wrong, but because she had been so confident in something she hadn't truly verified, and the fallout had ruined someone else's life. In a moment of quiet clarity, she made a decision that surprised everyone. The next morning, without clearing it with her attorneys, she called a press conference. Reporters flooded the room, expecting a defensive stance, maybe a blame game. Instead, Caroline walked to the podium, took a deep breath, and said, I need to say something, not as a media figure, as a person. What followed was raw, unpolished, and devastatingly honest. I made a statement on live television about Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett that was false. I didn't know it was false at the time, but I failed to check the facts myself. That failure is mine. She didn't read from a script. She didn't pivot to excuses. Instead, she told the truth. I have since learned that members of my team altered documents and withheld warnings. I've terminated those responsible. But none of that changes the fact that I spoke the words, and those words hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Gasps echoed across the room. For that, I offer a full apology to Congresswoman Crockett, her family, and the community she serves. Then she paused, looked directly into the cameras, and said, Whatever legal consequences come next, I will accept them. The room was silent. Her phone buzzed constantly afterward, mostly from her lawyers. But one notification stood out. Jasmine Crockett was calling a press conference of her own, and the story was about to turn again. Caroline Leavitt's press conference was not rehearsed. It wasn't even approved by her legal team, and yet, within minutes of it ending, it had become the top story in America. She stood at the podium, unguarded, no teleprompter, no aids. Her voice didn't shake, her posture didn't falter, but her words cut through like nothing she'd ever said before. I made a mistake, she began. Not a political one, a human one. The press corps, known for its impatience, fell completely silent. I reported something about Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett that was not true. At the time, I believed the information was accurate. I believed my team had verified it, but I've since learned that warnings were withheld, documents altered, and critical disclaimers removed. Regardless of those facts, what matters most is this. I said it on national television, and I was wrong. She paused. You could hear camera shutters. One reporter even lowered their hand, no longer interested in asking a question, just watching. I want to apologize to Congresswoman Crockett. Not because I've been sued, not because of backlash, but because I hurt her. I hurt her family. I endangered her son. And that is not something I will ever justify or downplay. For a long moment, she looked directly into the cameras. This won't fix everything, I know that, but I hope it's a start. With that, she walked off the stage. No Q&A, no follow-up statement. Just the truth. Finally, plainly spoken. The reaction was instant. Clips of the apology spread faster than the original accusation. Hashtags flipped. Wabrick Crockett. Truth now trended alongside while Leavitt speaks. Pundits struggled to respond. Some conservative commentators accused her of capitulating to pressure. Others, even those critical of her politics, praised her courage. I've been doing this 30 years, one CNN anchor said that night, and I've never seen someone in her position admit fault with that much clarity. But perhaps the most anticipated response came hours later, when Jasmine Crockett called a press conference of her own. She entered the briefing room dressed in navy blue, papers in hand, expression unreadable. I've just watched Ms. Leavitt's statement, she began, and I want to start by saying something few people in politics get to say without regret. I respect the choice she made today. A low murmur passed through the crowd. When we filed this lawsuit, it wasn't out of vengeance, it was out of necessity. A line had been crossed and it couldn't be ignored, but accountability takes many forms, and what we witnessed today was a rare form, voluntary, unfiltered, and uncoached. Crockett shuffled her notes, then looked back up. However, the consequences of the original statement remain. Damage was done, trust was broken, and legal action must still proceed, just not in the same way. Reporters leaned forward. I am instructing my legal team to amend the lawsuit. We will no longer seek damages from Ms. Leavitt personally. Instead, we will pursue the network and political operatives who enabled this narrative to spread, even after knowing it was false. Gasps. In addition, I'm extending an invitation to Ms. Leavitt, not as a plaintiff, but as a colleague in accountability, to help draft a new standard for political communication. One rooted in fact-checking, transparency, and responsibility. She paused for emphasis. This is no longer about punishment. It's about precedent. And with that, she ended the conference. No bombast, no spin, just resolve. By nightfall, major news outlets had shifted their headlines from scandal to something no one had expected. Reconciliation. Not of ideology, but of integrity. For the first time since the entire ordeal began, two women on opposite sides of the political spectrum were being viewed not as enemies, but as agents of change. And neither of them had planned it that way. Just when it seemed like the tide was finally turning, the storm struck again, this time from an angle no one expected. 3 days after Jasmine Crockett announced she would amend the lawsuit and collaborate with Caroline Leavitt on a bipartisan initiative, a new video surfaced. Posted anonymously to a fringe video sharing platform, the clip showed what appeared to be Caroline in a closed-door meeting, laughing with aides and allegedly saying, "It doesn't matter if it's true, we got the headline, that's the game." The footage was grainy, shaky, and overlaid with subtitles, but it looked real, and it exploded. The video was quickly shared across Twitter, Facebook, Telegram, and YouTube. Influencers who had initially defended Leavitt turned on her. The hashtags shifted once again. Sash, fake apology, wash, cotton tape, Ojj, cancel Leavitt. Mainstream media replayed the clip with red warning banners. Shocking new footage emerges. Caroline's team went into freefall. Sponsors that had just returned pulled out again. Her apology, now lauded as brave, was being branded as manipulative. The network suspended her indefinitely. Even Crockett's supporters were calling on her to reinstate the lawsuit in full. Reporters flooded Crockett's office, demanding a response. Has Leavitt been lying all along? Do you regret showing her mercy? For the first time, Crockett hesitated. She watched the video over and over, disturbed by how convincing it looked. Her team urged caution. Her son begged her not to trust Leavitt again. But something felt off. The lighting, the audio lag, the way the lips didn't quite match the words. She picked up the phone and called a friend, an old colleague from her civil rights law days who now worked in digital forensics at the FBI. "Do me a favor," she said. "Run it through your system, quietly." 2 days later, the report came back. The video was fake. A hyper-realistic deepfake, stitched together from different closed-door footage, altered using AI voice synthesis, and distributed by accounts tied to a known extremist propaganda network. It was a digital smear campaign, engineered not just to take down Leavitt, but to destabilize the fragile alliance forming between her and Crockett. Jasmine sat with the report in her lap for a long time. She thought about walking away, about letting the lie run its course, letting public opinion finish what the lawsuit started. After all, that's what most people expected her to do. But that wasn't who she was. The next morning, Crockett called another press conference, her 5th in 3 weeks. "I've reviewed the so-called leaked footage of Ms. Leavitt," she said, holding up a printed still of the video. "And I want to state clearly and unequivocally, it's fake." Shock rippled through the room. "It is a sophisticated deepfake verified by federal forensics, designed to incite division, crafted to weaponize mistrust. Whoever made this did not just target Ms. Leavitt, they targeted our ability to move forward, to forgive, to rebuild." Then she did something no one saw coming. "I stand by my decision to amend the lawsuit, and I stand by my belief that Ms. Leavitt's apology was genuine. The backlash was immediate. Her staff warned it could cost her politically. But in the hours that followed, something else happened. Thousands of comments poured in, not of anger, but admiration. 'Integrity is protecting the truth even when it protects your enemy,' one tweet read. 'She's not choosing sides, she's choosing justice,' wrote another, and for the first time in this entire saga, both women were being seen not as symbols, but as people. Wounded, flawed, but unafraid to stand for what's right. Together." The morning after the deepfake scandal was exposed, Caroline Leavitt arrived at Jasmine Crockett's office alone. No lawyers, no cameras, just 2 chairs, a wooden desk, and the quiet tension of unfinished business. Crockett didn't rise when Leavitt entered. She simply gestured toward the chair across from her, her eyes fixed on a stack of documents. "Thank you for coming," she said, her tone neutral, unreadable. Leavitt sat, her palms sweating against the cool leather armrest. "Thank you for defending me," she said softly. "You didn't have to. I know what that cost you." Crockett looked up, her expression firm. "I didn't do it for you." Silence settled between them. "I did it because it was the truth," Crockett continued. "And because if I demand integrity from others, I have to uphold it myself, even when it's inconvenient. Even when it protects someone I once sued for $40 million. Leavitt nodded, absorbing every word. "That's the kind of leader I wish I had been from the start." Another pause. Then, for the first time, Crockett leaned back. "You said something during your apology about wanting to make it right beyond the lawsuit." "I meant it," Leavitt said immediately. "I want to help build something better, not just for my redemption, for the system that enabled this to happen in the first place." Crockett slid a folder across the table. "This is a draft initiative. I call it the Fierce but Factual Pledge. It outlines a series of principles: source verification, retraction protocols, whistleblower protections for staff who flag inaccuracies, and platform responsibility for amplification of false claims." Leavitt flipped through the pages. Her eyes stopped on one particular line. "We agree that passion in political communication must never come at the cost of truth." She looked up. "I want to sign it, and more than that, I want to champion it." Crockett studied her carefully. "I'll need more than a signature. I need you to show up, to speak about it, to help me build bipartisan support." "I will," Leavitt said without hesitation. "You have my word." For a long moment, the 2 women sat quietly. Opponents once, now unlikely partners. Not friends, not allies in ideology, but collaborators in something deeper. "You know," Crockett said, her voice softening slightly, "I wanted to bury you. When this started, that's the honest truth. I was furious, not just at you, but at the entire system that lets people with microphones hurt people without consequence." Leavitt's eyes welled slightly. "I get it, I do. And I'll spend the rest of my public life trying to make sure I never become that person again." Crockett stood and extended her hand. Leavitt rose and took it. And just like that, the story changed again. When the 2 emerged from the office, walking side by side down the Capitol hallway, reporters burst into a frenzy. But it wasn't the noise that mattered, it was the image. 2 women, once locked in a bitter lawsuit, now walking shoulder to shoulder, united not by politics, but by principle. The photo went viral within minutes. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was rare, and in a world starving for accountability, it was exactly the kind of story people were ready to believe in again. 1 year after that hallway handshake, captured in a single photo that went viral around the world, Caroline Leavitt and Jasmine Crockett stood side by side once again. This time there were microphones. This time there were cameras. This time it was planned. At a national press conference in Washington, D.C., beneath a banner that read, "Fierce but Factual, 1 year later," the two women addressed a room packed with reporters, politicians, educators, and activists. "We didn't set out to change anything," Crockett began. "We just wanted accountability." "But in seeking that," Leavitt added, "we found common ground, something increasingly rare in today's political landscape." Their joint initiative had grown far beyond what either imagined. The fierce but factual pledge had been adopted by 6 major media networks and more than 50 political candidates across party lines. University journalism programs began incorporating it into their ethics curricula. Independent watchdog groups launched tools for verifying public claims made by commentators. Even tech platforms began labeling unverified statements made by political influencers. More importantly, voters began to notice. A national survey revealed that 78% of Americans, regardless of political affiliation, supported stricter standards for public communication. The demand wasn't partisan, it was moral. People wanted truth to matter again. For Caroline Leavitt, the journey had been humbling. She lost contracts, lost followers, lost the certainty that once made her so compelling on camera. But what she gained in its place, credibility, clarity, and purpose, was something no publicist could manufacture. She launched a podcast called Verified, where she dissected how narratives form and how facts are distorted. She invited critics on regularly. She began speaking at universities, not to defend what had happened, but to warn others not to repeat it. "I learned that integrity starts before the camera rolls," she said in one episode. And accountability doesn't end when the apology is aired. For Jasmine Crockett, the experience elevated her beyond partisanship. She was no longer just the progressive Congresswoman from Texas. She became a national figure on media reform. She was invited to sit on ethics panels, write op-eds for national newspapers, and eventually, she was tapped to chair a new House subcommittee on public communications and trust. But she never saw herself as a celebrity. "I'm a woman who was lied about," she told one interviewer, "and instead of letting it define me, I used it." The power of their story wasn't in the lawsuit. It was in what came after. They showed that people could mess up, publicly, profoundly, and still come back if they chose truth over pride. They proved that two women, shaped by totally different experiences, could meet at the crossroads of pain and principle and walk away united, not in belief, but in purpose. And they reminded an entire industry that there are limits, that lies cost something. That reputation, once broken, is not easily rebuilt, but it can be if one is willing to pay the price. As the anniversary press conference drew to a close, a reporter asked them what came next. Crockett smiled. "Accountability isn't a one-time thing, it's a practice." Leavitt added, "We'll keep pushing for truth, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then." They left the podium to a standing ovation. But the most powerful moment came hours later, in a follow-up interview. When asked whether either of them regretted how it all started, Leavitt paused, then said, "I regret making the false claim, deeply, but I don't regret where it led us." Crockett nodded. Sometimes the most painful lessons are the ones worth sharing. If you've been moved by this story, we invite you to reflect on what it means to speak with integrity, whether you're on a national stage or just talking with friends. Like this video if you believe facts still matter. Subscribe for more stories of impact, redemption, and truth. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think should be required of public figures before they speak? And remember, the most powerful voices aren't always the loudest. They're the ones willing to tell the truth, even when it's hard. Because truth still matters, and we deserve a discourse that honors it.